not hearing her.
Tonight is one of many programs included in our Spring Festival, which features nearly 50 compelling conversations, powerful performances, and other events across the city. We hope that you can join us for 2 more full days of events, just like this one, on May 4th in the Bridgeport neighborhood, and on May 18th on the campus of Illinois Tech in the Bronzeville community. As always, you'll hear from some of today's most thoughtful artists, authors, journalists, and academics, including novelists and memoirists Amy Tan and Jamaica Kincaid, architects Walter Hood and Amanda Williams, artist Marina Abramovich and Hebrew Brantley, and musicians Questlove and Ronnie Malley. So on your way out, please grab one of the programs. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to give thanks to some of our presenting partners, Builders Vision, Friedman Properties, and the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, and our Spring Season Foundation, and our Spring Season sponsors, the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation and Nielsen IQ. Finally, we'd like to thank our members and donors for their generosity. If you love what we do, please consider becoming a member and visit our website at chicagohumanities.org. Now, a few words about our speakers. Eddie Glaude Jr. is the author of several books, including Democracy in Black and the New York Times bestseller Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. Is the winner of the Harriet Beecher Stowe Book Prize. He frequently appears in the media as an MSNBC contributor on programs like Morning Joe and Deadline White House. Our moderators, it's a duo here for you this evening. Ben Austin is a journalist and the author of Correction, Parole, Prison, and the Possibility of Change, which was named one of the best books of 2023 by the Washington Post. His book, High Risers, Cabrini Green and the Fate of American Public Housing, was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal of Excellence in Nonfiction. A former editor at Harper's Magazine, Ben teaches in the creative writing program at the University of Chicago and is co-host of the Pushkin podcast, Some of My Best Friends Are. Khalil Gibran Muhammad is the Ford Foundation Professor of History, Race, and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, where he directs the Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability Project. He is also a co-host of the Pushkin podcast, Some of My Best Friends Are, available free wherever you get your podcasts, and the former director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, a division of the New York Public Library and the world's leading library and archive for global Black history. Now please help me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Eddie Glaude, Ben Austin, and Khalil Gibran Muhammad.
What a terrific audience. Thank you so much for that warm welcome on such a warm day in Chicago. This is excellent.
Hey, thank you for coming out, everybody. Eddie, it's amazing to sit up here with you. Welcome to Chicago.
It's my pleasure. Chicago, it feels like Mississippi.
Some days, wait till July, for sure. I often say to people who are not Chicagoans, and certainly as a kind of transplanted New Yorker, Chicago's a beach town, and people are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, really. And coming up here to this event and being on Lakeshore Drive, I'm just reminded of how special the city is. So it's a real honor to be back home, to be part of the Chicago Humanities Festival. So, all right, so let's get started. You heard that we have this podcast, and so it's important for us to do this in the way that we would have a conversation on the podcast, because otherwise, why do you need us here?
And you know, part of our podcast is that Khalil and I grew up together here on the South Side. We've been best friends.
Not here. We're not on the South Side anymore. We've crossed over.
Here in Chicago, on the South Side. Here, comma. And we've known each other. I mean, we started sort of being friends when we were 14. And, you know, on our show, which is, you know, called Some of My Best Friends Are, and you can sort of ... and fill in the blank. And so we talk a lot about race, but we talk a lot about Chicago and our childhood here and what it means. And invariably, Eddie, we talk about the Obamas. And one of our first episodes...
We talk a lot about the Obamas. Yeah.
They're Chicagoans, sort of thinking what it means. And one of our first episodes, in fact, was kind of book reports that we did for each other. We didn't want to each have to read Obama's really long biography. So each of us read one of the Obama's biographies and presented it to the other.
Yeah. That's what you do when you want to pretend to be really smart.
And we did it so that listeners wouldn't have to read either one necessarily, but they would
Keep
know
it
all
simple.
about it.
Keep it
Yeah.
simple. That's how it works. So we are interested, Eddie, in the context for this new book that you've written. We are the leaders we have been waiting for. And the spine of the book are these 3 lectures, which you say you deliver in 2011. So before we get into the actual stories that you tell, let's just talk about the times in which you're thinking about leadership. Take us back to the Obama era. Take us back to where you were as a Princeton professor trying to make sense of the promises and the possibilities.
So first of all, it's a delight to be on the podcast, to be in conversation with you, and to be here at the Chicago's Humanities Festival. I want to thank all of the folks who are making this possible, the people behind the scenes. Sister Michaela, thank you for getting us out on the stage. I really appreciate you, all the invisible labor that makes the festival go, so thank you. What was I thinking about? In 2011, initially I didn't want to do the lectures.
And just for context, these lectures are...
These are the Du Bois lectures at Harvard University. They're the signature lectures in the field of African American studies. So it's a signal that, not like you've arrived, but, it's just an important moment in your career.
But you did not arrive.
No,
That's what you're trying to tell us.
So what happened was we were building African American studies at the time at Princeton. We were writing reports, trying to get the departmentalization, hiring folk. And so I was really busy, and I thought, I don't have time to sit down and think through these lectures. And Imani Perry, who's my writing partner, said, oh, you're gonna write these lectures, right? And so I finally sat down, and it's turned out to be this extremely fertile moment. So 4 books came out of the soil of those lectures. So Democracy in Black. If you read the last chapter, you could see elements of the argument. You could see Begin Again in the heroism chapter. You could see Baldwin everywhere. The work I've done on pragmatism and African American religion, you can see that in the text. But what was really motivating is that I was kind of pissed.
All right, that's good. That's good fuel.
And going back to the 2 book reports on Obama, I was upset that people were narrating the Black freedom struggle as if Obama's election to the presidency was its fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I was worried that something was happening to the very nature of Black politics, that folk were narrowing the range of what constituted legitimate forms of political dissent because they were now getting invited to the White House. I wasn't getting invited to the White House, by the way.
You and some other guy used to be at Princeton.
But Cornell had a whole different kind of motivation. Cornell West had a different motivation as him and Tavis were doing the poverty, or whatever they were doing, right? And part of what I was trying to do was to figure out what is going to happen, A, to the tradition, and B, to our agency in relation to the conditions under which we were living our lives as a community of folk. And so what I wanted to do was to disrupt the romance around President Obama. And to do that in 2011 was...
You are in Chicago saying this, by the way.
On purpose. On purpose.
It's kind of safe now, though.
Yeah, it's kind of safe now.
Yeah.
Back then it wasn't.
It was not safe.
No,
back
no,
then,
it wasn't. People took me to the altar, and it wasn't for prayer.
And
It was not for prayer.
This is a book, in many ways, where you're thinking about the term prophecy and prophesizing. And, one of the prophecies, in a sense, that you gave, and you talk about this at the start of the introduction, is a few years later, when the election was coming up, you were saying publicly not to vote for Hillary Clinton, that you're sort of extending on these ideas. And we'll talk more about this, but that's a kind of, you can prophesy and you can be wrong.
Oh, absolutely. I was wrong as 2 left feet.
Yeah.
But it's one of the mistakes that I've made that I haven't forgiven myself for. I don't particularly care about being trolled on X or people telling me that they'll never forgive me because I'm the reason we live in the Trump world. I think that's nonsense. But I never believed, I never thought the country would elect someone so vile.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought that the country would elect someone so obviously unqualified. So I thought we had room to play.
Yeah, room to play is a good way to
You
put
better act
it.
right now. You see who just
I
walked
know,
in?
yeah.
Right. So I thought we had room to do something because, you know, we're in a moment where the age of Reagan is collapsing. Its contradictions are in full view. And if that's true, then those things that were constituted in response to it, the Democratic Party as it's currently constituted, is a mirror image of the age of Reagan. It actually reflects its fundamental assumptions. Right, we're going to see this in Chicago pretty soon at the Democratic National Convention. Just wait.
Yeah.
Right? And so I thought we had space. And so I said, okay, let's blank out. If you're in a state where it's a battleground state, vote for Hillary Clinton. But if you're in a place like New Jersey, let's try to do something around the Democratic Convention. Let's vote your conscience. Let's try to get some delegates in. And, you know, some people have used that during the Democratic primary around Gaza, in Michigan and a lot of other places, right? They were using the same strategy. But then, as a reader of James Baldwin, Doc, I should have known better. Baldwin writes an open letter to Jimmy Carter in 79. And he's a part of a large group of black political leaders and thought leaders who are really pissed with Carter. Because Carter's presidency, in part, is a result of black voters. But Carter's policies, one could think of Jimmy Carter as the first neoliberal president. Policies of austerity that impacted urban centers in distinctive ways. Black leaders like Jesse Jackson were angry. And Jimmy said, I'm angry too, but I know who Reagan is. Reagan was the governor of California. For black power proponents, Reagan is as notorious as George Wallace, right? So he says, I know who Reagan is. And so Jimmy says, sometimes you don't have a choice, but you vote to buy yourself some time.
Yeah. I like that.
And so that's where I am right now. So I keep kicking myself. I should have known better.
So just to put a bow on the prophetic, we all heard this sort of lyric when Obama won in 2009. So it goes something like this: Rosa set so that Martin could dream, Martin dreamed so that Obama could run. And this evocation, you see Eddie shaking his head, right? So this evocation of the lineage, the legacy of people whose lives were on the line, whose future was uncertain, and who never basked in the glory of the spoils of electoral politics in the way that those who win office often do. So you've written a book that basically takes 3 civil rights icons,
Right.
the most famous of whom is Dr. King, Malcolm X, and then an incredibly important, though far lesser known and appreciated, Ella Baker.
Yes.
Yeah.
And through their stories, you try to disrupt the ways in which these singular figures don't inspire democratic participation, which is counterintuitive. So let's start with Ella Baker, because in some ways she models what you are trying to get us to. Tell us who Ella Baker was, and what is it about her leadership that people need to know today?
Such a wonderful character. I'm going to steal that. That's a wonderful summary of the book. Without Miss Baker, the Black freedom movement of the 20th century doesn't make sense. She's a field secretary for the NAACP in the 1940s. So that means she's moving about in the South, helping organize chapters, helping resource chapters in the most dangerous moment, period, for that organization in so many ways. She's the first executive director of SCLC. So when King decides to organize that particular organization, he asks her to do it. I can only imagine what she had to endure dealing with all of those preachers, right? Somebody has to write a book entitled All the King's Men, because those are some complicated preachers, right, on so many levels. And in that experience, she comes to a deep suspicion of charismatic leadership. This emphasis on the pulpit as opposed to the pew, trying to make folk followers as opposed to engaging in the deliberative process, right? Being the leaders that they're looking for. And then, of course, you have the student sit-ins of the 1960, and you have Wildcat sit-ins in Nashville and Atlanta, in California, in North Carolina, and they all organized. Those students come together in April of 1960 at Shaw University to organize the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Well, why are they at Shaw? That's Miss Baker's alma mater. She is at the heart of helping organize those students. And one of the things that she insisted, right, that the purpose of organizing is not to helicopter into a space and lead people to the promised land, but rather to create the conditions under which indigenous leadership could emerge, where they could be the advocates for their own conditions, right? And so she has this wonderful phrase, Doc, a strong people don't need strong leaders. Right? And so she has their two-pronged approach. One, the object is to expand who matters in the demos. Right? That democracy isn't about political consultants. It's not about this black political class. It's not about simply oligarchs and politicians, but everyday ordinary people, people that you don't think, who live on the margins, who fall through the cracks. So these black sharecroppers in Mississippi matter to the functioning of democracy. So that's one thing, expand who matters in the demos. The second move is to create the condition under which those of us who live here reach for higher forms of excellence, that we become the kinds of people that democracies require, that we work at being better people.
I've been telling this to Ben for a long time.
Since y'all were 14.
Be better, Ben.
Yeah. You see, so those are the elements of Ms. Baker's philosophy that just really, really attract.
It's really powerful, and you know, we have an amazing Ella Baker scholar here in Chicago, Barbara Ransby.
Absolutely. I'm indebted to Doc Ransby, absolutely.
And you can hear in what you're saying the roots of sort of Black Lives Matter, non-leadership leadership in exactly what you're saying. Like this is sort of, this lives on in the present. I want to ask you another aspect of the book, which is the book is also in many ways about fathers. Yeah. And in the sense of even kind of intellectual fathers for you. This is you know, talking to your mentors and to other scholars, but also in the most literal sense. You talk about your own dad. And could you just tell us a little bit about your relationship with your father?
And a little bit about Moss Point. I mean, you know, it's just, we did say Mississippi, Chicago is just Mississippi North, but.
You know, I'm from the water. You know, I could literally walk to the Gulf of Mexico. My town is called Moss Point, named after the moss that hangs from magnolia trees. It's beautiful. Bayous run through the city, or the town, or the hamlet, however you want to describe it, right? Best seafood on the planet, you know. It's a difficult question, and every time, I've been doing this since it came out, and every time it's asked, I just pause. Because, you know, my dad is everything to me, but he scared the shit out of me. You know, he deposited a kind of fear in me that led me to conclude that I was a coward. You know, Jimmy used to say, Baldwin used to say that, you know, he was afraid from the moment he took his first breath, right? I don't remember in my childhood when I wasn't afraid. He could, you know, I tell the story in the book. I begin the heroism chapter with this horrific moment. You know, I'm playing with my neighbor. She was so cute. And we were playing hopscotch. And, you know, she'd throw a rock and right? And my task was to mess up every time. I was going to step on every line. I was going to fall out because I wanted her to keep showing me. Yeah. So I'm showing I'm in the 5th grade, but I'm showing my skill set real early, right? And as we're playing, and she kept showing me, I hear my dad scream for me to bring my ass home. And I walk into the foyer of the house, and my uncle's sitting on the couch, and he's looking like something's about to go down. And my dad asked me, "What are you, a fag or something?" And I'm looking at him, and he's got that look, and I started to well up. And, you know, it was this real hurtful moment. And he did that a couple of times, right? Something like that. But he's the most responsible man I know. I mean, he got married at 21. My mom was 20. They had 4 kids. I didn't find out that my brother and sister weren't his until I was in high school, because there was no distinction in the crib.
No, but just so you know, that's not in the book. So
No.
You don't have to tell. You don't have to tell
I'm
all of it.
I'm trying to give a sense of who my dad is, you know? And so he used to say to all of us, if you survive me, then nothing in the world can shake you.
Mm. And he meant it with love, that he was training you.
And so part of what I'm doing in that moment is, what do you do with love that leaves bruises, that leaves marks? How do you, and then you combine that with this sense of being out of time and out of space. I'm Gen X, we're Gen X, right?
We're Gen X.
So we're born in the shadow of what I take to be the greatest generation America ever produced. What do? We coming of age in the age of Reagan, right? I mean, you got Malcolm, you got Huey, you got Martin, you got Miss Baker, right? What are you to do? So, you know, oh, if I'm just born out of place and time, if I was in the 60s, I would have been standing post. I would have been standing post. I would have been serving breakfast.
That means in the struggle, just so everyone knows.
I would have been standing post. I would have been in the breakfast program with the Panther Party, right? I would have been right there in Mississippi with MFDP. You know, you're just imagining all these things because you're not in that moment. So what happens? I lose myself, right, in relation to a father who makes me cower. And then I lose myself in relation to a tradition, right, that I seem not to possess outside of a nostalgic longing for. Yeah. So what happens to self-creation in that, right? And so then that's when I find Malcolm.
So let's talk about Malcolm in particular. He's a very well-known figure, obviously, but you try to position Malcolm not just in the personal being that you adopt him, as you write, as a hero.
Yeah.
And you started to talk just now a little bit about the distance that comes with lionizing people who are on pedestals, who seem out of reach. And talk a little bit about what it is in this version of Malcolm that you bring to the reader that you think is the legacy we ought to hold on to.
He's all too human.
Too human, you said.
All too human, you know.
Yeah.
He's down. I use a phrase throughout the book, close to the ground. I want us to get close to the ground. We can't transform the world unless we unless we are in the world as it is, have a clear sense of the world as it came to be. And that becomes the ground for us to imagine the world as it could be. So this relationship between the past, the present, and the future is all felt right here, right now, in this moment, you see. And so Malcolm, post the nation, Imani Perry, we were reading, Imani's my writing partner, so I invoke her a lot. So
And a former Princeton professor, an amazing scholar and
writer. It hurts to hear former, but we're going to make up for that soon. But anyway, the idea, we were reading Manning Marble's Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. And, you know, Manning was trying to retrieve the true Malcolm from the contrived version of Malcolm in the autobiography. But I wasn't interested in that project. This is the real Malcolm, no. And Imani said, when he left the nation, he was just flailing and failing, right? That he was engaged in this act of self-creation in the pursuit of justice in public with others, right? And so that Malcolm became much more interesting to me because he became a wounded witness, right? As opposed to the shining black prince. The shining black prince demands supplication.
Which is the beautiful line that Ossie Davis coins at the eulogy of Malcolm X.
Yeah, so, you know, I was just in the basement of Abyssinian Baptist Church just the night before last.
Harlem, New York.
In Harlem. I keep forgetting I'm in Chicago. In Harlem, famous black church. And I was talking to these young black men, and I said, you know, Malcolm, you know, as Shining Black Prince is supplication. Malcolm as Wounded Witness is an example. And I said, what is the difference between imitation and citation? And he said, yeah, I got it. So if you imitate Malcolm, you got your goatee, right? I said, yeah. And you try to, you know, mimic him. But if you're citing Malcolm, then Malcolm's life becomes a resource for you in your effort to, I said, there you go. You got it. So Wounded Witness lends itself to citation, not imitation.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's a moment when we were kids and you were trying to adopt a Malcolm goatee, right?
But Eddie has left out a part that you started, I mean, talking about like father figures. Like the goatee that you are still wearing to
Never
this
shave
day.
it off. Even
that you grew because of Malcolm.
absolutely. Even you know, I was trying to live Malcolm's life. I even joined the Nation for 3 months.
Yeah. Even Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who is the great grandson of Elijah Muhammad, has not joined the Nation.
For 3 months. For 3 months.
Hey,
and
man, don't be telling my business.
And I wouldn't shave it off.
Yeah.
I wouldn't shave it off. Those first dispensation brothers were like,
not good. It's
that's
not
not
good.
a good thing. That's not a good thing. So no, you know, I get to Morehouse. I basically ran away from home at 16. Morehouse has an early admit program. I wanted to get away from my father so bad that I just applied to go to college. So I get to Morehouse. I think I'm the man, right?
You still do, but
I was
it's
about
okay.
to say that.
Yeah, you still do.
Can't you tell I went to Morehouse? So I get to Morehouse, and I think I'm, you know, and I remember this dude coming, John Gates, I think, came up to me and he said, "You're like a hand without a thumb."
That's an intellectual put down.
Yeah, he's like,
You know, or
got
like
all
a
of this-
preacher put
Called
down.
him a monkey is what he called him.
oh,
Hey,
I mean, you know, those thumbs are important.
don't you say that.
and I think monkeys have thumbs.
I think so too.
No, opposable thumbs is a thing.
And he threw me the autobiography. I went back to Graves Hall, and I read it from cover to cover that night. And it was a transformative experience. It was like Saul to Paul. You know, I found the language for my dad's rage. I found the language for my own unease. And then I just reorganized my life. We started an organization called the Organization of African American Consciousness. And it was a reading group. We were reading.
You can shout out Stephanie.
Yes, that we were reading. We were with John Heath and a whole bunch of folk. We were reading, you know, Cheikh Anta Diop, George James, Walter Rodney. We were just reading the nationalist canon, right?
Yeah.
And then I didn't realize, because I'm from the country. I'm from Osborne. I'm from a small little town, right? And every time I'm with these brothers and sisters, they all smell the same. I didn't, you know, revolutionaries got an odor.
It's that incense.
Right, and I thought it was because they were just sitting in rooms with a lot of Egyptian musk incense burning, and so I didn't know. So I went and bought some. Don't y'all laugh at me. I went and bought some Egyptian musk incense. I rubbed them on my neck, got a rash. I didn't know it was oils.
Yeah.
But you know, black nationalist pieties were as foreign to me as Islam. I grew up in the Josephite Catholic tradition on the coast of Mississippi. Right? I could still say Mass if you just, you know, apostles come like that, right? Smells, revolutionary odor. The only odor I knew was the smell of the porgy plant and the paper mill, right? So this was this moment of self-creation, of self-invention. And Malcolm became this surrogate father because when I inhabited Malcolm's pose, when I became Malcolm's son, I could shift my shoulders. there's a kind of hyper-masculinist posture. I wasn't afraid, you know. I would say to some people quick at Morehouse and Spelman, the reason you behave that way is because you're psychologically enslaved. Now let me explain to you why. Let me explain. It was a different way of being
And they
in
were
the
like,
world.
man, another brother read Malcolm X.
I know. And you go, shock, shakal, right?
Another freshman.
Oh, but right. Then they thought I was a freshman. Still I started doing it. So it became this real transformative experience. And I remember coming home, and my great grandmama, who the best pinto beans on the planet, whole cake bread on the top of the stove. You know, you could forget you didn't have any meat. And I came home and got my Malcolm X stuff on, and you know, I got my horn rim glasses. I really didn't need glasses. I just bought them. and she's like, "What's going on with you?" And I laid it out. And this woman who spent her life as a domestic worker on the coast of Mississippi said to me, "You know, white folk ain't gonna change, right?" And then I said, "That's the problem." And she said, No. If you keep dwelling on this shit, baby, it's gonna eat you up. And then she walked away. It became this, and that quotation is actually in Exodus, my first book. It was this extraordinarily wise intervention to try to get me to orient myself differently to the world.
And maybe that's a way to think about the third figure in the book and the best known of them, which is King. And in a way, he's the best known and the most misunderstood. And what does he mean for this moment now, for you?
King always poses a danger, because King is often deployed for purposes that are insidious. He's deployed, A, to justify who leads the march. I'm in the tradition of Dr. King. And B, Dr. King is deployed to narrow the range of what constitutes legitimate forms of black dissent, political dissent. So
to discipline dissent.
Exactly, to discipline dissent. So if you don't fall within the boundaries of a certain version of Dr. King, then that politics is somehow illegitimate, you see. And so part of what we have to do, I think, is to bring him down to the ground. Right? Prophets and heroes, understood in a certain way, are dangerous for democracy, because you outsource your responsibility to them. And the moment you outsource your responsibility to another, you cease the hard work of working on yourself. Remember, it's simultaneous. Expand the meaning of the demos, expand who matters, and work on becoming a better human being. And so Dr. King, from 55 to 63, right, is something to bludgeon, right, often, rarely to inspire, right? And to my mind, the history of black politics, particularly if you look at the turn of the 20th century, and you just look at all of the political actors on the scene, you got black Marxists, you got black liberals, you got black nationalists, you got black internationalists, you got a Garveyite. None of these people really existed in the 19th.
You forgot the black conservatives.
The black conservatives, right? It's a panoply of folk, and they're engaged in a vibrant exchange about what's the best course of action for black folk. You see something similar. I mean, it has to be reactivated in the mid-20th century. And oftentimes when we narrate the struggle of the mid-20th century, we narrate that struggle as a story of decline. Right? So the high point is 1963 with the March on Washington. You begin with 54 Brown v. Board, 55 Montgomery, 60 student sit-ins, 63 King, 64 Civil Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act, 65 Selma, King's dead. No mention of Greenwood, Mississippi. No mention of Oakland, California, 1966. No mention of Watts. No mention of co-op organizations in Jackson, no mention, because as Obama said when he was narrating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, we were struggling for freedom, and then we lost our way. Right? And so part of what King does, he becomes an efficient way of narrowing, and then we end up with a custodial form of politics.
Yeah. So let me summarize this, and I'm going to throw a question to Ben. So we started with Ella Baker, and we learned that there's a more common term that movement scholars would use to sort of describe the mode of organizing, which would be participatory democracy. And Eddie's talked at length about expanding the demos network. So this leadership lesson is the capstone of the stories that you tell, which get us to Ella Baker. And of course, we've just talked about the way in which lionizing heroes misses their own failing and flailing, which is us. It's our own imperfection, our own humanity, and invites us to participate. And then finally, we have prophets on pedestals, for whom none of us can ever live up to. No man can be a prophet in his own land, right? And so you cannot claim that. It just happens. It's bestowed upon you, and you talk about this. And so if it hasn't been bestowed on you, or in the Baptist tradition, if you haven't been called, then shut up and wait for permission to speak. So those two paradigms, the prophet, the hero, give way to this appreciation for participatory democracy, that we all have the inherent capacity to do so. So if that's the case, I want to start with Ben on this last question, which is, you've been reporting for years about various Black Lives Matter, racial justice movements here in this city, going back at least a decade, to the Obama years, through the Trump years. And I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about, maybe to just characterize some of what you saw happening then. In some ways, our podcast was a culmination of sort of the promise and the possibility. If we think of the summer of 2020, when millions of people were in the streets in this country, it was an apotheosis, an apex moment for a lot of what Ben had been writing about and reporting on. And I remember him sharing pieces with me, and just a very exciting moment. The first time I participated in Chicago Humanities Festival was a lecture several years ago, and I quoted Ben in the lecture precisely because we were living through a moment of the promise and the possibility for an expanded democracy. So Ben, talk a little bit about that, and then we're gonna hear from Eddie to sort of navigate this moment of backlash.
Yeah, and this is a way, it's very much, I think about Eddie's work with Begin Again, which is just a tremendous book that's set at the start of the Trump era. And you sort of doubling and thinking about James Baldwin during the Reagan era, and with all his friends murdered, and the civil rights movement in shambles, and left with the Reagan years. And then you thinking of yourself as a Baldwin scholar in this moment. It's a powerful doubling that's, biography and memoir and comparative history. But then we move forward and we have this moment in 2020, which feels, we were talking about being Gen X and that we were not really part of protest movements. They didn't exist. We could either look back, and then something happens which is not our generation either, and it's the largest public protest in the nation's history. And I'm reporting on criminal justice changes, and I'm writing a book at parole hearings, and I think I'm writing one book. I think I'm witnessing firsthand at parole hearings. I think I'm seeing change. And then it's supercharged at some point in 2020, the kind of change we're seeing from 2009, the height of mass incarceration and sort of a trickling, decarceration that happens over a decade. It felt like something was happening. But we are in a different moment. Our podcast sort of is born out of 2020 when a podcast company is like, you know what, we want to talk about race. Let's get these two guys to do it. And I'm sure both of you had very prosperous public speaking at that moment. That was part of the moment. You could look at what was on the bestseller list. It's incredible. We were as a country having discussions and reconsiderations. But our podcast ends up, by the time we're actually making it, our podcast is about backlash. Our podcast is about, every week we talk, some other kind of retrenchment that is happening. And so then throwing this back at you, we're in this moment. You write about a moment in 2018, and you were talking about the Obama moment, but we're in right now, which is a different kind of moment. And so how do you think about these three figures and, the kind of prophesying going forward right now?
Well, obviously we all need to be listening to this podcast, right? It's such a great question. And remember, I wrote these lectures, in 2011, 2010. So I returned to them in the summer of 2023. And I returned to them primarily because of grief and bitter disappointment. I'm like, I keep saying to myself, they're doing it again. They're doing this shit again. And I needed to find resources because I had lost my bearings. We're not talking about all the dead. We've lost 1 million people. Can you imagine all of the private anniversaries, the empty chairs? Right?
All the death from COVID-19.
All the death. People didn't sit shiva. Folk couldn't go to wakes. People couldn't say goodbye right. And where I'm from, when people don't die right, they don't stay in the ground.
You get ghosts.
Yeah, they haunt, right? So I had to find resources because I'm trying to get an understanding of then and now, then and now, then and now. And I'm trying to resist the kind of pessimist conclusion, right? Trying to resist the pessimist conclusion. And so we're in a moment where the fever dream has spiked, right? Again. And it's not going to be resolved by way of appeal to platitudes. It's not going, the one thing about America is America changes all the time without changing ever at all. That's James Baldwin, right? That's Baldwin, right? And so we're in this moment, a backlash, this moment where whenever the nation, I'm looking at a time, Ralph Ellison published a piece, April 1970, in a special issue of Time magazine. The piece would then be republished in Going to the Territory in 1986. But the title of the piece is, What Would America Be Like Without Blacks? And in it, he basically says something like this. Whenever the country gets weary of the democratic struggle for equality, it reaches for secession. It reaches for the fantasy of a lily white America. It has to remove the question of race from public conscience, right? And so it becomes, as he puts it, we engage in what we call that tricky magic. And that tricky magic is that alchemical process by which we turn our insecurities, right, into whiteness. And we have the other, whether it's the N word, whether it's the F word, whether it's the illegal, right? And those others become the means by which we reconsolidate our sense of ourselves. And we're in that moment. It's never going to be resolved if we play footsies with it like we've done historically. Yeah. And so the only way we're going to save this democracy is if we do it, if we figure out a different way of being together. And the only way we can figure out a different way of being together, the intimacy that defines your friendship, as opposed to the walking mysteries that we are. The intimacies of our hatred, right? What do I mean by that? Really quickly, what do I mean by that? People knew who killed Emmett Till. Chicago. You know why they knew? Because they drank beer with him. They ate dinner with him. They loved him. People know who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. They're your cousins. They're your brothers and sisters.
Ben's cousins, not mine.
Not my cousins.
You know what you hear around your table. You know what you hear around the people you love. We got to figure out a different way of being together. And so this is the cliche at the heart of the book, the through line. If we are the leaders that we've been looking for, then we got to be better people. That's right. If we're going to be better people, we got to build a better world, because the world as it is keeps us from becoming better people. And all that we want to do, and this is from the frightened little boy who went through all of this stuff about manhood only to end in Ella Baker's lap,
Yeah.
to be taught by this black woman. If all that we want to do is to make ourselves more efficient for good, that's James W.C. Pennington's language from 1849. All that I want to do is to make myself more efficient for good. We got to do the hard work of working on ourselves with you, and building a democracy close to the ground. That's the only way this place is going to be saved. If you're waiting on Joe Biden, I got an affordable flat in Brooklyn to sell you. Right? We have to do this, I promise you. And I believe in my heart of hearts that we can. Yes, indeed.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So we have 10 minutes for questions. We'll take the last one at about 5:55. So
I'll be short with my answers.
Let's get this queue going if anyone has questions. So do we require? Yes, the mic's coming. So we've got one up here at some point. Oh, look at that. Alden Morris, Professor Morris in the house. Good to see you, brother.
What's happening? Hey, Doc.
It's really, hey. It's really good to see you all. And I do have a question. I've been thinking about this since you wrote your book. Are there some really great things about having great leaders? It seems to me that when we think of somebody like King, when I interviewed many of the people around King, organizers, ordinary people, they talked about how King inspired them. Gonna tell you this, Ella Baker was a leader.
Absolutely.
And just because she preached participatory democracy doesn't detract from the fact that she, in fact, was a leader of that position. So my question is that, is there not a role for prophetic leaders and charismatic leaders and so on in movements? Have they not done good things? Because I don't think that it means that you can have great leaders and you automatically become disenfranchised because you can't be them. You can also learn from them, like you said at the feet of Ella Baker. I mean, I know that was figuratively. But at any rate, so that's my question. Are you not detracting their attention away from the role that somebody like Martin Luther King actually played?
So I don't want to be misread as having a leveling impulse, as if all of us have the same talents. I mean, all of us can't be Malcolm, all of us can't be Martin, all of us can't be Ella Baker, right? But I'm of the mindset of I'm going to invoke Ralph Waldo Emerson. And Emerson says that great people come to us such that even greater people may follow. And so part of what I'm trying to suggest is that our orientation to the leader, right, shifts. Right? Of course, leaders have their role and purpose. History calls you forward. Some people come, some people step forward, some people step back. Right? And we want to understand that difference. But part of the aim of this book, and I should say this, Brother Alden, that it engages in overstatement for a reason, right? To insist on the work that we must do. Because in our tradition, that custodial form of politics that often the leader represents actually results in our abdication of our responsibility. Oh, if we only had a Martin Luther King Jr. Boy, if Elijah was back, we need that man today. You've heard that one before, right? Not really. Yeah. Right? And so part of what nostalgia actually is, the nostalgic longing actually is a reflection of the abdication of responsibility. Right? We need that as opposed to you stepping into the breach, right? So I agree with what you're saying wholeheartedly, but what I'm trying to do is to create the conditions under which even that they become exemplary as opposed to people who follow. Let me say this really quickly. If you have a church full of followers, let me say it different. If you have a church full of fans and a pulpit inhabited by a celebrity, the church is dead. You cannot be on your spiritual journey by being a fan, right? And a celebrity isn't a shepherd, right? It demands a different kind of relation. So I'm trying to disrupt its distortion, not its fact, if that makes sense. I'll be quicker. I told y'all I was lying, so I was honest.
I want to thank the three of you for being here today. Gerard McClendon, Professor, Chicago State.
It's good to see you.
Hey, Brother Khalil, how you doing? Question for Dr. Eddie Glaude. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. James Baldwin.
Right.
What does that mean to Dr. Eddie Glaude?
Junior.
To risk everything, man. To risk everything. You know, I mean, the thing that we have to face every single day is the temptation of the bribe. And the temptation of the bribe is clear, where you become adjusted to the world as it is, right? Where you lose your ability to sing off key. You become part of the chorus. So for me, to act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger, is to engage in a kind of truth-telling, small t, right, that aims and seeks to make people uncomfortable, to unsettle folk, but to do so with love. Now, what that means in its details, or what that results in, is that my office is more secure at Princeton than the president's. Right.
I think we have one more up front.
Y'all can unpack what that means. But don't come up in my house. I'm from Mississippi.
Professor, thank you for coming to Chicago.
Thank you.
I do profess we try and catch you on MSNBC whenever possible.
Thank you.
Can I get your opinion on a current set of circumstances? Supreme Court's argument this week was devastating. And when you stop to think about, one of those seats was stolen, one of those seats said couldn't happen by virtue of a rule that was broken, and then the third seat, that same rule was broken again 1 week before an election. When you stop to think about what it is that you heard and the framework for trying to construct minority rule, help us understand your perspective on it.
Well, I think we're in a second. Richard Slotkin has a new book out, and he says we're in a second redemption. He calls it the second lost cause. It's one of the most undemocratic moments in the history of the United States, and the court played a central role in that moment. So we're right squarely in it. I had to listen to it because I was on MSNBC right afterwards,
Listen to the book. You mean.
Yeah, to listen to the oral arguments. I had to listen to the arguments, and I had to comment on it. And as I was listening to the arguments, my mouth just fell open, and I couldn't quite. I was like, oh my God, listen at these people contort themselves to kind of open up space for qualified immunity or absolute immunity, whatever. And then I was thinking about that over and against the former president of the United States in a courtroom in New York. And then I was thinking about that over and against the students on campuses all over the country being assaulted by police. I was like, and they're sicking police on their children, right? Where the moral issue of our day is, you know, wherever you stand on the Israel-Palestine situation, whatever position you stand, every 10 minutes, a baby is either injured or killed in Gaza. Wherever you stand, you should say, stop it. Stop it. Because that kind of complicity, right, with that corrodes the soul. It has an impact. You become monstrous, if you're okay with that, or silent in the face of that. Right? So, I say that those three elements, American democracy is in the balance. I mean, damn. And so if you don't see it, just with those three examples, right, then you're sleepwalking, to use Thoreau's language, right? So how do we respond? We have to take responsibility for democracy, you and I. Because, you know, I don't know, you know, that serpent, that reptile that's in the bosom of the nation, as Frederick Douglass talked about in January 5th of 1852, it's not a full-blown serpent eating the country's entrails. We're old. I don't know if we can survive this again. So we have a lot of work to do.
And I just want to thank Eddie Glaude again for being here, Ben Austin, all of you for not going to the beach right now, but creating the possibilities for democracy to win. So thank you all very much for being here.